If you've spent any amount of time as a card counter, you know that losing streaks are real. Well, at one horrific point, the Blackjack team I co-managed was down almost $500,000. I'm gonna share with you how we got into that hole, how we dug out of it, and most importantly, what you need to know so you can learn from our mistakes. Hey, I'm Colin from Blackjack Apprenticeship, and when I was 22 years old, me and a few friends started counting cards for real money, and within about 2 years, we were up nearly $500,000. At that point, the team kind of split up, and one of the original members, Ben, he and I started this larger team that was kind of jokingly referred to as the church team because some of the original members were people that we knew from our churches, and this is even our team logo. We had these t-shirts made for us way back in the day, and it's the Las Vegas Strip with a steeple right in the middle. Kind of clever, right? The church team started out amazing. In the first year and a half, we had won nearly $1.5 million, and then everything started to come crashing down with the infamous bankroll number 12. We went on a losing streak that I didn't even know was possible, and at one point we were down $465,000, which was almost half of our bankroll. How the heck did this happen? How did we get out of it? And most importantly, what do you need to know so that you don't make the same mistakes? I'm gonna get into it starting with the 3 things that I blame for this huge losing streak. I'm sure you're wondering, Colin, how does a team lose $465,000? Well, we didn't exactly. You see, the first cause of this losing streak was actually expenses. We were a large-scale team, which meant we paid our players something as they went. They got more money as a result of profits, but we were paying players. But on top of that, when you're traveling full-time, you've got hotel, rental car, airfare, and all of those expenses. When you're losing, those expenses are adding up because you're continuing to have to travel to generate more EV. And we actually had $170,000 worth of expenses over the course of this bankroll. So we didn't lose $465,000. At our worst, we were down about $300,000 of actual losses at the casinos. So it's not quite as bad as it sounds, but here's how this matters for you. Your bankroll is what you can put towards playing blackjack at the tables. If you're also going to have expenses, those need to be outside of your bankroll. Or if you're going to be taking money out of your bankroll, especially when you're down for all of your expenses, your risk is actually a lot higher than you think. So we had this $1 million bankroll, but that wasn't $1 million for the tables. That was $1 million to cover all of our expenses and for any losing streaks. The bottom line is you have to work your expenses into your business plan. Do you plan on traveling as an advantage player? Well, think about what those expenses are going to cost, work it into your business plan so your risk isn't actually higher than you think it's going to be. Of course, it's all great when you're winning, but the smart AP is planning for worst case scenario. The second cause of this losing streak was poor play. There's a part in Holy Rollers, a documentary that followed the church team for a number of years, where we actually took all of the players on the team. This is during this losing streak. We took them to a casino and retested them one at a time to see how they were actually playing in a live casino environment. And the results were pretty depressing. Here's how this matters for you. Now, I've said this 1,000 times, but the reality is the vast majority of card counters never get their game to perfect. And the sad thing is a 90% card counter isn't just making 90% of the EV of a perfect card counter. A 90% card counter is going to lose money. Guys, this is way too common. We do these blackjack boot camps in Vegas where we train players for a weekend, and one of the most common takeaways from these people, and these people have put in a lot of time into their games, but the most common takeaway is people are not as good at blackjack as they think they are. Even worse than that is when people convince themselves that even though they didn't impress us, you know what? I think I'm still pretty good at blackjack. Well, those players are not going to make it. They're going to slowly lose their bankroll until they give up or they tap out. The third cause of this horrific losing streak, in my opinion, is variance. And I kind of cringe and hesitate to say this because it's far too common for advantage players to blame their losses on variance, but there's a little bit of context here, so let me explain it to you. If you just look at our performance before this losing streak, we were very likely overperforming. But the problem is when you're overperforming, you don't necessarily know you are. After a certain number of hours, you think, oh man, I'm just better than EV, or maybe my EV is higher than I thought it was. So You can see here this best fitting line for the point up through the first 11 bankrolls, or almost $1.5 million in profit. The best fitting line looks pretty awesome. For those first 11 bankrolls, we were probably overperforming quite a bit. It just felt normal. Then we hit this losing streak. That didn't mean we were due for a loss, but the reality is you can't predict when you're going to win or lose. But if you zoom out for the full graph, this is actually not even the full church team, but the first couple $1 million of our profits, you could see that the best fitting line isn't quite as awesome as that original first 11 bankrolls. Well, what does this mean for you? It's very convenient to calculate your EV or your AV when you're on a winning streak and say, hey, this is what's going to continue. Remember, we don't make our decisions based on theoretical or our past performance, but based on EV. We just go out there, we generate it, we stay humble, we put in the work, we trust the math, and let the cards fall as they may. So that's how we got into this mess, but what did we do to get out of it? Well, we called this emergency meeting. It was me, Ben, and Mark, the three of us. We kind of managed the team together, and we'd been through losing streaks before, but nothing like this. So we needed a plan to get out of it so that we didn't actually blow up this entire team.
And for that matter, I think almost everyone, what we realized universally is almost everyone is, we're not doing the big bet spread until we solve a lot of kinks in everyone's game.
We came up with 4 things that we could do that was controlling what we could control to right the ship and try to get things back on track. Here's what we came up with. The first was removing players that were not an asset to the team. Now you might be thinking we just looked at our results and said which players are losing and we'll just cut them, but that's not the way we think. We think based on performance. If we can see that people have what it takes, we don't worry about short-term results. We worry about if they can play perfectly, if they have the personality and the time to put into this, then we see them as an asset. We created 3 lists. We had the people we knew were an asset. We had those that we believed had to step up their game, and then everybody else. And everybody else had to go. Now, as hard as it is to fire your friends, and believe me, it is hard, we knew we had to make the team leaner and meaner and stick with the people we knew were an asset to the team. So what does that mean for you? If you can't do something exceptionally well, maybe you shouldn't be doing it at all. So maybe you need to look at your own life, whether it's in the casinos or out of it, and decide if there are some things that you need to fire yourself from. Or, like the players that we kept but on a short leash, you're gonna need to step up your game. The second thing we did is with those players we kept on the team, which I wanna say we cut the team basically in half. With those players we kept, we focused on their skill level staying at a high level. Like I said before, just because you get to this point where you pass some test out doesn't mean your skills stay at that level. I think it's human nature for things to just kind of decline. And so we focused on retesting our players every single month. You need a way to get your skills to perfect, or whatever standard of perfection is necessary for card counting, and then you need to keep your skills at that level. And a lot of the pros that I know, they continue to train regularly. One of my favorite stories is from Burning the Tables in Las Vegas by Ian Anderson, and he talks about this horrific losing streak he's on. And this guy was a pro's pro. He had done this for a long time, made tons of money as a card counter, but during this losing streak, he stayed humble, and he actually went to a friend, another pro, and said, hey, will you test me out? Because I want to make sure my losses are not because I have weaknesses in my game. But I love that story because that's what we need to do. We need to stay humble. We need to keep our skills at a level necessary to be a winning player. The third thing we did, and this is a huge one, is we downsized our bet spreads. So like I said before, we had roughly $1 million bankroll, but now it's cut in half. We had to resize all of our bet spreads to get our risk again down to a very low level, because the cards don't care that you've been losing. They're not going to say, hey, we're going to make sure you start winning now. The cards have no memory. And one of the biggest mistakes I see card counters make, the second biggest mistake to just not being good enough at the tables, is not managing their bankrolls. When you're losing, you've got to resize, and it sucks because it's going to take longer to win all that money back because you're generating less EV when you're betting smaller, but you've got to stay in the game. An AP has 2 assets, their brains and their bankroll. And if you are not protecting your bankroll, I don't care how smart of an AP you are not going to have enough bullets to fire at the casino to overcome variance. The fourth thing we had to do to dig out of this hole was to stay patient. If you look at this graph, you can see that we eventually dug out of this hole, and we actually made more money after this losing streak than all of the bankrolls before it. It wasn't going to happen overnight. So we had to go out there, generate EV hour after hour, week after week, trip after trip, sometimes month after month, and just trust the math. What does this mean for you? Well, if you're looking at card counting as a job where you're gonna get regular income like a paycheck, you are either going to get discouraged or you're gonna lose patience and burn out, because that's not how this skill works. If, however, you look at card counting as an investment that is guaranteed to grow after enough hours, if your game is perfect, then you will see your graph go up. You just have no idea how long it's gonna take. Maybe you start winning right away, maybe you start losing right away, but any card counter is gonna tell you there's gonna be all sorts of ups and downs. And that's why it's better to see it as an investment that pays off over the long haul than as short-term income. So in the end, we worked on our skills, we trusted the math, and it all worked out to the tune of over $3 million for the church team. And if you want to succeed at this, you're going to have to do the exact same thing. For more on card counting, you can subscribe to this channel, or if you're serious about training, about betting software, casino intel, and being a part of a community of like-minded card counters and APs, check out blackjackapprenticeship.com.